Princess Anne has returned home after spending 5 nights in hospital for a concussion. It's understood that the 73-year-old suffered minor head injuries after being struck by a horse on her estate.
In the quiet hours before dawn, Buckingham Palace released a solemn message that sent a chill through Britain and beyond. No fanfare, no lengthy explanation, just a brief, heartbreaking announcement about Princess Anne that left the nation holding its breath. Within minutes, phones buzzed, reporters scrambled, and millions searched for answers, fearing the worst. The Princess Royal, known for her unwavering strength and tireless service, had suddenly become the focus of deep concern. So what happened behind those palace walls? And why did officials sound so alarmingly grave? Shadows gathered before the announcement. The palace had always been a place where routine wrapped itself around chaos. But in those days, leading to the public statement, everything felt heavier, as if the old walls themselves sensed what was coming. Princess Anne moved through the corridors of her Gloucestershire home with the steady discipline she was known for. Yet something in her manner had shifted. She kept her voice firm, her posture straight, but the calm she projected was a fragile shield over a storm she could no longer outrun. People around her recalled how she had cancelled 2 small engagements in late autumn, something she rarely did in all her decades of service. On paper, the cancellations meant nothing more than schedule adjustments, the kind that usually passed unnoticed. But those close to her knew she was a creature of habit. She did not change plans without reason. And the reason, though still private, was already taking shape weeks earlier, hidden behind guarded faces, early morning drives, and conversations spoken in low tones behind locked doors. The moment that shifted everything had actually come long before the public ever heard a word. Anne had been undergoing quiet medical monitoring since early spring, supervised by a discreet team the palace trusted completely. At first, they assured her the situation was manageable, a word that had a comforting sound but no real weight. But as the months passed, that word began slipping further from reality. Her last assessment before the palace announcement was meant to be straightforward, a follow-up scheduled at a private clinic outside London. The checkup would normally last an hour. She preferred to go alone, insisting she did not need escorts or fuss. But on that particular morning, one of her closest aides went with her, insisting quietly that she shouldn't make the drive alone. Anne didn't argue. That was the first sign something was troubling her more deeply than she admitted. The tests dragged on. Blood work, imaging scans, neurological evaluations, and then more scans, more consultations, more silence between the professionals who suddenly avoided meeting her eyes. Hours passed. The clinic rooms felt too bright, too cold. When the lead physician finally asked her to sit down, Anne's instinct told her what was coming before he spoke a single sentence. His expression carried the truth with a weight that words struggled to hold. He explained the progression they had been tracking, terms she had heard before but now delivered with a finality she had not expected yet. The words sounded distant and clinical, but phrases like accelerated deterioration and limited timeline struck sharply. Anne sat perfectly composed, the way she always did, absorbing every detail without flinching, even as she felt something deep inside her begin to shift. She asked only practical questions about her duties, her physical limits, and the treatment possibilities. The doctor hesitated too often. That was the most telling sign of all. The drive back was silent. Her aide later admitted they checked the rearview mirror repeatedly, wondering if paparazzi had somehow caught hints of the day's events. The fear wasn't of headlines. It was of losing control of the narrative before the family could even understand it themselves. Protecting Anne's privacy mattered more than protecting the institution. That evening at Gatcombe Park, she walked the grounds alone as dusk settled, her steps steady, but her thoughts racing. She remembered upcoming engagements, promises made to charities, letters she still needed to sign. She thought of her grandchildren, of the next Christmas at Sandringham, of the years ahead she had assumed would remain filled with service and purpose. But the doctor's words had placed an invisible clock beside her life, one she could hear ticking no matter how hard she tried to silence it. The following day brought its own complications. Senior palace staff had been expecting her for a briefing on the next year's program, but Anne didn't attend. Instead, an emergency meeting was called at Buckingham Palace, one of those discreet gatherings meant only for the most sensitive matters. 12 people were summoned. No aides, no private secretaries who did not absolutely need to be in the room. By the time Anne arrived, King Charles was already seated, looking pale and unsettled. He had been informed late the night before, but had insisted on hearing the full details directly from the medical advisors. When Anne sat beside him, he reached for her hand, a simple gesture, but one that left the room in stunned silence. They were siblings before anything else, and in that moment, the weight of the crown meant nothing. The consultants explained everything with clinical clarity: the progression, the likely impact on her ability to carry out public duties, the strain that upcoming treatments would place on her energy and time, the possible need to reduce her workload, something Anne had resisted her entire life. A longtime staff member, a woman who had served 3 generations of royals, couldn't hold back tears. Another official looked physically shaken when the medical prognosis became clear. Discussions went on for hours. Succession wasn't directly affected, but the stability of the working royal family was. Anne had been one of the most reliable pillars for decades, the one who took on more engagements than anyone, the one who never complained, never stumbled, never hesitated. Now they had to consider how to protect her dignity, her privacy, and the continuity of public duties all at once. Through it all, Anne spoke with her usual steady tone. She insisted the public had no right to panic and no need for speculation. She emphasized that her illness was not the story, the work was. But the advisors knew better. They had watched this pattern before, the palace shielding the truth until it was no longer possible. And so plans were formed, a controlled timetable, a carefully crafted statement, a strategy to preserve calm while preparing the world for what lay ahead. When the meeting finally ended, Anne stepped into the palace courtyard, the cold London air brushing against her face. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared for the reality she could no longer outrun. Only 48 hours remained before the world would learn that behind the glitter of the monarchy, one of its strongest figures was fighting a battle she had carried alone for far too long. So what do you think drove one of the royals' strongest figures to fight a secret battle, even as a chilling palace message shook everyone at 10 o'clock? The morning the palace fell silent. At exactly 10 o'clock, long before the usual churn of royal updates or daily briefings, a message spread across every official palace channel, sharp, brief, and cold enough to stop conversations mid-sentence. Staff outside Princess Anne's tight circle stared at their screens, reading the same 4 lines the world was reading, trying to steady their breaths as the weight of those carefully chosen words settled over them. No warning, no whispered clues, just a public announcement crafted with precision and released at a moment designed to command attention without competing with anything else happening that day. Inside the palace, however, the atmosphere had been tightening for days. Princess Anne had watched the growing storm gather around her family, knowing the world was about to learn only a fraction of what she privately carried. The wording of the statement gave nothing away, no explanation of the medical troubles affecting those closest to her, no hint of the long nights, the sudden consultations, or the moments when even seasoned royal aides struggled to keep composure. Only a blunt acknowledgement that serious health issues were forcing one of the most visible royal figures to step away indefinitely. Reactions online exploded within minutes, hashtags climbing, news anchors pausing mid-broadcast, reporters rushing to Kensington gates, and social feeds clogging with theories, some compassionate, many reckless. Yet behind those gates, life shrank into a tense, quiet bubble. Phones were silenced, curtains were partly drawn. A sense of isolation settled even as the world's attention grew louder by the second. Princess Anne arrived shortly after the announcement, moving through corridors she had known all her life with an unsteady calm. She had traveled from Gatcombe Park immediately after being briefed, her instincts pushing her forward faster than protocol required. The moment she stepped into the private sitting room, she crossed the space in a few strides and wrapped her arms around the family member, whose future now felt frighteningly uncertain. She did not ask questions, there had been too many already, from too many people who were not entitled to answers. Instead, she offered the one thing she still had control over: steady presence, unwavering loyalty. Later, in a quieter room away from anxious staff and echoing hallways, she listened as the full truth unfolded. Every medical report, every opinion from specialists consulted between London and Aberdeen, every possibility no one wanted, spoken aloud. Anne's expression hardly changed. Years of discipline carved into her, but every few minutes her hands tightened around the armrest, betraying what her face would not. When the explanation finally ended, she exhaled so deeply it sounded almost like a sob swallowed before it could escape. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, not out of helplessness, but out of a fierce determination to shoulder whatever burden she could. The answer was painfully simple: privacy, protection, and time luxuries the monarchy rarely offered willingly. Time to manage treatment. Time to shield the children from the worst fears. Time to breathe without the press turning every step into spectacle. The children, sensitive and intuitive, had been kept home that day. Their usually lively chatter had quieted into soft whispers as they observed adults speaking in coded sentences and moving with unusual heaviness. Even without understanding the details, they sensed the shift, the way familiar rhythms of palace life were breaking apart. Anne helped prepare the children's evening routine, knowing this small bit of stability mattered. Yet she also knew the conversation that awaited them would mark the end of their childhood's certainty. She stayed nearby as the parents gathered the little ones, sitting with them in a room arranged to feel warm and safe despite the dread curling inside every adult present. The words began slowly, gentle mentions of doctors, rest, and the need to stay close to home. The youngest leaned into their mother immediately, instinctively seeking comfort. Charlotte's eyes filled almost as soon as she realized something was wrong. George, old enough to understand more, asked the one question no parent wants to hear, the one Princess Anne heard echoing in the hallway like a small heartbreak cracking the air. "Are you dying?" Silence followed, heavy and sharp. The reply was honest, but carefully measured. No promises, no platitudes, only reassurance that illness did not mean imminent death, and that every available option was being used to fight for more time together. Anne stood by the doorway, unseen by the children but ready if her presence was needed. She pressed a hand to her chest as the conversation stretched into nearly an hour of questions, tears, attempts at smiles, small hands gripping larger ones, and the quiet confusion of young minds trying to understand why everything suddenly felt uncertain. Once the children were in bed, worn out from emotion, Princess Anne found the two parents sitting close together on the sofa, leaning into each other with a fatigue that went far beyond the physical. They looked up when she entered, their eyes reflecting gratitude and fear all at once. "The statement is out," she whispered, as though the walls themselves might be listening. "You've told the children. Now the real part begins." Her voice carried no panic, only determination. Whatever came next, the waves of attention, the medical challenges, the slow reshaping of their daily lives, she would stand with them. For her, loyalty was not ceremonial. It was lived, fiercely, and without hesitation. The palace, for all its grandeur and history, felt strangely small that night, quiet, heavy, suspended between what had been and what might come. And somewhere amid the silence, Princess Anne remained a constant anchor, holding the family steady as the world outside braced for updates, unaware of the deeper, quieter struggle unfolding behind the gates. What do you think is really happening behind the palace's controlled announcement about Princess Anne's health? Could a hidden struggle be about to change everything we thought we knew? The choice Princess Anne could never share. The announcement from the palace carried a calm, controlled tone, the type crafted to steady public nerves. It mentioned that Princess Anne would be stepping back from duties for health-related reasons, nothing more. But those who watched her closely, those who understood the way she moved through the world with determination and quiet strength, felt a shift that was impossible to ignore. Behind the measured words, something heavier was unfolding, something even her closest family did not fully see. Long before the statement was released, Anne had been wrestling with a truth she kept carefully hidden. Doctors had explained her condition in private consultations in early 2025, laying out two conventional paths: an aggressive medical fight that would demand surgeries, intense drugs, and months of painful recovery, or a gentler route focused on comfort and acceptance. Neither option impressed her. She listened, nodded, but her mind searched for something else, something with even a fragment of hope. She found it quietly, without fanfare, in a research center far from London, tucked into the mountains of western Switzerland. Their team was testing an experimental protocol, still in early phases but whispered about in specialist circles for its bold ambition. It was dangerous, not uncertain, risky, but truly dangerous. The medical team warned her that even if it succeeded, it would not save her life. At best, it might give her a few extra years. At worst, it could shorten her remaining time. The choice made no sense on paper, yet it pulled at her with a force she could not ignore. Anne, who had spent decades carrying responsibility without complaint, chose that unapproved third path. She made discreet calls, arranged her files, and signed the legal documents the Swiss doctors required pages and pages, acknowledging that she understood the consequences. She traveled to Switzerland once in late spring for preliminary assessments. Unnoticed by the public and even most palace staff, the specialists set her start date for mid-July, giving her only a few weeks to prepare her affairs. Keeping the secret became the hardest weight she had ever carried. Her daughter Zara asked more than once why her mother seemed distracted, and Peter tried to lighten the atmosphere with jokes that only made Anne smile briefly before drifting back into deep thought. She wanted to tell them everything, to gather them in a room and explain the truth with the openness their family had always believed in. But every time she imagined their faces, the fear, the heartbreak, the questions she could not answer, she swallowed her confession. King Charles, however, sensed something long before anyone else. He visited her privately at Windsor one quiet evening, his expression serious, not as a monarch, but as a brother who had known her since childhood. He told her gently that she had the look she always had when planning something she knew others would try to stop. At first she tried to deflect, but the effort exhausted her. So she told him everything: the treatment, the risks, the reason she could not bear to burden her children until she had no choice left. Charles listened in silence. When she finished, he asked her only one thing: "If this fails, how do I tell your children and grandchildren why you were not here when they needed you most?" The question broke through her defenses, not enough to change her decision, but enough to shake it. She promised him she would tell them before she left, even though she dreaded the day that promise would come due. As the palace announcement circulated, as newspapers speculated, and cameras waited outside royal gates, Princess Anne prepared for a journey no one knew about, toward a fragile chance at more time, and the painful conversations she could no longer avoid. Could Princess Anne finally confront the tension she'd long sensed? Or would the night's silence hide truths she was desperate to uncover? A night of secrets and choices. The night was quiet, the house wrapped in the kind of stillness that only comes when children are finally asleep. Princess Anne sat by the fire, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, feeling the weight of unspoken words pressing down on the room. She had noticed his tension for days, the way his smiles didn't quite reach his eyes, the restless pacing when he thought no one was watching. And tonight, it was different. Tonight, he needed to tell her something that could change everything. He asked her to sit beside him, and immediately, she sensed the gravity of the moment. Her expression shifted, alert and wary, as if bracing herself for a storm. He took her hands, cold to the touch, and began speaking. "I haven't been fully honest about what I'm facing," he admitted, his voice low, trembling under the weight of truth. "About the treatment, about what might happen. I thought I could handle this on my own, but I can't." Princess Anne's eyes widened, a mix of shock and concern flickering across her face. She said nothing, letting him continue, gripping his hands tighter as if grounding them both in reality. As he revealed the details, the risky treatment in Switzerland, the potential consequences, and the possibility of disappearing for months, her emotions shifted like clouds in a storm. Shock gave way to fear, fear to hurt, hurt to quiet anger. Each revelation landed like a stone in a still pond, rippling through her carefully maintained composure. When he finished, the silence was suffocating. She pulled her hands free and walked to the window, staring into the darkness outside. Her back turned. He waited, torn between wanting to reach for her and giving her the space she needed. Finally, she turned, and the words that left her lips cut deeper than any silence could. "You were planning to go, to risk everything, and lie about it. Did you think about me at all? About what it would do to me? Thinking you were just away on some trip?" He rose slowly, closing the distance between them, but respecting the invisible barrier her anger had built. "Of course, I thought about you. Constantly. That is why I'm doing this, to give us more time together with the children," he said, voice firm but vulnerable. "I know it's risky. I know the odds are not in my favor, but it's the only real chance I have." Bitter laughter escaped her lips, brittle and aching, a sound shaped by frustration, fear, and the kind of despair she could no longer contain. "And if it doesn't work? If I get the call from Switzerland that you're gone, and I never even had the chance to say goodbye?" The question lingered heavily between them, sharp enough to wound. Her voice trembled, but beneath the shaking was an unmistakable edge of accusation, one he couldn't deflect or soften. For hours they went back and forth, words colliding in a mix of anger, heartbreak, and truths neither had wanted to face. She accused him of selfishness, of making life-changing decisions in secret, of assuming she wasn't strong enough to stand beside him in the darkness. He defended himself clumsily, insisting he had only wanted to protect her, to shield the family from fear. Yet even as he spoke, a hollow ache in his chest admitted what he refused to say aloud. She was right. He had acted from desperation, not partnership, treating her like someone to be protected rather than the equal she had always been. Eventually, the storm burned itself out. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing with a force he had never seen in her. "I cannot lose you," she whispered. "I cannot do this alone." Kneeling beside her, he gathered her into his arms, voice breaking as he murmured, "Nothing about this is fair, but I have to try. I can't just do nothing." In the quiet aftermath, she pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Then we do it together. We will call your doctors tomorrow. I need to know the truth, the real odds. No fear, no desperation, just facts. Then we decide. Together." Relief washed over him, heavy and palpable. Finally, even amid the darkness, there was a path forward, a fragile promise held between them in the stillness of the night. Would the fragile promise in the night survive Anne's grueling treatment, or would her family's silent struggle tear it apart? Shadows and light, a royal test of endurance. 3 weeks into her treatment in a secluded Swiss clinic, everything shifted. Princess Anne had endured procedures that tested every limit of her body, each day a fragile balance between hope and despair. While she faced the relentless regimen at home, her family carried a quiet struggle of their own. Her children's laughter masked the weight of absence, and late at night, behind closed doors, grief and exhaustion became her constant companions. Phone calls with her loved ones were brief, tense threads keeping them tethered across miles. Anne always reassured them she was managing, sparing them the raw truth of pain so severe it often left her unable to move. Moments when she questioned the path she had chosen. The call came unexpectedly, not from Anne herself, but from the lead physician at the facility. Her spouse's heart sank at the unfamiliar number, bracing for the worst. Instead, the doctor's voice brought a strange mixture of relief and urgency. "Your Highness, she is stable, but you must come to Switzerland immediately. There has been a development." The next hours were a blur emergency childcare arrangements, a private flight, and a journey that felt impossibly long yet urgent. Arriving at the clinic, her spouse found Anne frailer than ever, her features etched with fatigue yet illuminated by a fierce determination. Seeing her alive and conscious after weeks of uncertainty brought tears that could not be restrained. Collapsing beside her, the sense of relief was almost unbearable. Anne reached for her hand, her grip weak but steady. "I told you I would get through this," she whispered. Her partner smiled through the tears, grounding themselves in the fragile triumph before them. "You've survived a war in silence," they murmured, feeling the weight of weeks spent apart. Anne nodded faintly, a tired but genuine smile touching her lips. "Yes, but it worked. I have time now. Time to witness our family grow. Time we feared was lost forever." Once medically cleared, Anne returned home under carefully orchestrated secrecy, the world unaware of the storm that had passed. She arrived at her residence late at night, greeted by children too young to fully grasp the ordeal, their questions and hugs masking the fragility beneath her calm exterior. Kneeling to their level, she assured them she was stronger now, even as she felt every step's lingering pain. Privately, the truth remained. Her condition had improved dramatically, but uncertainty lingered. There would be good days and difficult ones, and the future, though unpredictable, was a gift regained. Anne's recovery and her family's parallel resilience forged a bond deeper than before, a silent understanding of fear, hope, and shared endurance. Ordinary moments, quiet mornings without pain, afternoons filled with laughter, evenings free from medical routines became treasures they fiercely protected. As months passed, Anne began resuming public duties, appearing with care and presence that felt more authentic than before. Those who met her sensed a remarkable shift, an honesty and vulnerability stripped of pretense, revealing a woman who had confronted mortality and emerged with newfound grace. She continued the practices she had begun during her treatment, documenting messages of survival, hope, and gratitude. These recordings, intended for her children when they were older, held the story of fear and courage, a testament to the family's resilience. For now, they remained hidden, a quiet capsule of struggle and triumph, a reminder of the extraordinary strength it took to reclaim life from the shadows. So, what does this really mean for Princess Anne? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.